Hello and welcome back to Popcorn Chat. I hope you guys are doing well. As you can see in this video, I'm joined by Alex from Nordic Watchlist, who has an amazing website talking all things Nordic cinema. So I thought I'd get him on the channel, introduce him to you guys, and tell you a little bit about what his website's all about. So hi Alex, how you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you, Sarah. It's really good to get to speak to you and talk all things Nordic. I'm very excited. Yeah, looking forward to it.
So could you tell people a little bit about what the Nordic Watchlist is?
Yeah, I won't go too much into the kind of the mad history behind it, but it's been going for about 2.5 years now, and it kind of started off as a little bit of a fun project basically, and it kind of erupted quite quickly, picked up a lot of interest from the people involved with the film and directors and things like that. The site is basically a way of kind of introducing people to all the kind of Nordic cinema, TV series, documentaries, and then also there is a bit of culture with like the kind of travel and Nordic books, like Nordic noir books and things like that. And I think really my big thing is just trying to fly the flag for Nordic film, cinema, and all of these things. Because there is some seriously good stuff out there, and in a world where there is so much to watch, like from all over the world, I think it's good to kind of help try and push these things a little higher up into people's kind of peripherals or something.
I was just a little bit curious about what initially drew you into Nordic cinema. Was it the culture, the locations, or the genre it lends itself to?
I think it started with music first, and not to show my age, but I think when I was about 13, I got the Björk album debut, like literally her debut solo album, and kind of fell in love with the music and the kind of melodies and things there. And that then grew a bit with Sigur Rós and other kind of bands. And so it kind of started from there, just to state, not ABBA. I was never an ABBA fan. Very sorry to upset the Swedes, but that's not my jam. But I think I was thinking back, and I think one of my first experiences with Nordic film, like one of the was Let the Right One In, and it kind of started from there. And not only the film, but also the book as well, which is an incredible book, Swedish author there. And I think that was the kind of first film that kind of made me start kind of investigating the kind of Nordic film. I was always into foreign cinema. I've been a huge fan of, like, a lot of French cinema, and then also Japanese and things like that, Korean cinema. So there's always that interest there. I didn't have a problem with subtitles, basically, which I think is always the most common problem at the moment with people even watching these films. It grew from there, and the more I started to scratch away at it, and over the past kind of 4 years, 5 years now, there's been so much stuff from film and documentary and series, and it's just kind of like open Pandora's box really for me with that.
Amazing. Yeah, I think having again like going back to these platforms and stuff and things like Netflix taking a chance and putting things like The Bridge on, and they do adaptations into UK for no reason of these certain
Yeah.
shows. Either way, it's great exposure, and I think it's bringing more people into sort of Nordic cinema and TV. And I know mentioned earlier, Alex, but I know you've been to places with Nordic Watches. I know you've been to, is it Norway and Sweden, I think it is.
Yeah, so I think for part of the kind of where it escalated a lot, was that so I've worked in the travel industry for ages, a long time, uh, and I started with the Nordic kind of travel industry in 2010. So I started selling Iceland as a destination at the time. That was just when the famous volcano Eyjafjallajökull had erupted. I think I've just pronounced that right.
Sounds amazing to me.
And we'll go with that. The And I think when that started, then I started becoming more interested. I started like looking more into the music, more into the kind of film, and found more stuff. Around that time, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, the Ben Stiller film, kind of, and that ties in a bit with the film we'll discuss later. But Yeah, I just started to dig and find more with that. So I've been really lucky to kind of travel all around Scandinavia and Iceland. And I think it's important to know because some people may not know what is Nordic, like what does that entail? And the Nordic region basically is, and I've got to make sure I get this right, but it's Iceland, the Faroe Islands, Greenland, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland. So it's all of those. That is the Nordic region, basically. And so, yes, I've been very much involved. That's my day job, basically. So I'm pretty much doing Nordic stuff almost 24/7. So it's very much in my DNA. So I love traveling there a lot and getting to kind of experience. So I've got to get to experience the cultures and, all the different kind of languages and things like that. So yeah, I think that's where that continues on as well.
I'm sure you've been asked this many times, but I'm curious if you could give us like your top three Nordic films.
There's two films for me that are currently, like, without doubt, part of that top three, and that is Another Round with Mads Mikkelsen, and then The Worst Person in the World, which I think is it's a
Still
no-brainer,
not
really,
seen it.
almost.
I've still not
What?
seen it. I
What?
know it's crazy.
Okay, we'll get on to a little bit on that later because I know, yeah, we've got yeah, you've got to see that film. Oh my gosh.
I know, I know.
But for my kind of other ones, I've cheated a little bit because I kind of like because I've gone for ones in different countries almost in a way. So
That's fine.
another one is a Finnish film, which I think is absolutely superb. And I think actually I watched this film. I think I heard about it, and I know it was during the pandemic. And I just remember late at night I saw it. I think it was on Shudder or something, out of all places, because it's not really a horror film. It was a film called Dogs Don't Wear Pants, which is a fascinating Finnish film about a guy who basically loses his wife and he gets into kind of BDSM and likes to be strangled by this lady who he meets. Sounds lovely, and it is lovely, and it's got one of the nicest endings and things like that. But it's a very weird and crazy film, and I love that film, and I think it's so unique in it. I think that opened a kind of gateway for me to start delving into some of the other stuff that's out there rather than the more generic things that you can sometimes find. And the other film is one that we're going to talk about in a bit as well. So I had to include that. So get Iceland in there as well. So
Amazing. It's interesting because I was quite surprised when you said your first two then, because I think they're quite mainstream, I guess, now in terms of like Nordic cinema. I thought you'd go for something a little bit more niche, but it's interesting. You still
yeah.
think there's value in these like bigger named and sort of higher budget films.
That's a really good point, and I think part of the reason, I think for me personally, like the one thing I love about Another Round is I just love the ending, and
Mm.
I will watch that ending over and over and over and over again. There's a so I think there's something about that. I also, again, just the humor in that, but I remember watching that film and I thought this could go on to win an Oscar, and when it did, it was just when I'd started kind of Nordic Watch List, so
Mm.
there's a bit of a kind of, I don't know, like a kind of personal kind of thing there with
Yeah.
that started a kind of chain reaction, and that leads to, I guess, The Worst Person in the World, because the following year in Cannes, I think it was even the following year, there was a huge year for Nordic film with, you have Flea and Compartment Number Six, Lamb, and all suddenly these films merging up there. I The Worst Person in the World, I think I love so much. I think there's different aspects of it in terms of its soundtrack, the setting of Oslo and things like that. So there's other things that I like to tap into with that film, which I adore. Though Oslo August 31st, which is the second film, which is part of this imaginary trilogy of Joachim Trier, is a close second when you combine the two. And some will argue it's the better film, but that's another debate for another time. Maybe another podcast there, I think.
Yeah, I have to go back and watch these films and
Yeah,
come back.
definitely. We've got to set that up.
I know we sort of touched on it a little bit as well, but I was curious if, people are sort of listening to this or they just generally have an interest in Nordic or Scandinavian cinema. What films or TV shows would you tell them to start with? Like, what's a good sort of entry level?
I think one of the biggest problems with Nordic cinema and TV series is that I think there is a generation who writes it off as just Nordic noir, that it's just, detective series, dead body, blah 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 blah, and that has changed. There's been a huge shift in that, and especially recently. And there is so many different genres and different types of stories that are available to us now. And I guess it depends on each person's taste. I always say, get in touch with me and say, hey, look, I kind of like these kind of shows and films. What, you know, I'll be happy to kind of go, right, I reckon this is the one for you. Like, I love to do that. But, you know, there's a few things that are out there and also that are accessible for you to watch. I think Snabba Cash is one that it was an old Swedish trilogy, which has now been kind of revamped as a series on Netflix, and there's two seasons of that. They're short episodes, you know, they're not 12 episodes, and that puts a lot of people off, and the too long series, you just think I don't have the time for it. But Snabba Cash is a great starting point if you want something. Is it? I don't want to say like it's not Top Boy, but it's more of a different kind of scene, basically, about businesswomen who gets involved with the wrong people, and kind of gangs are involved and things like that. And just talking about that, you think to yourself, well, hang on, are we talking about Stockholm and gangs and things like that? So immediately, you know, that suddenly should catch some people's attention. I know I recommended it to a few Twitter people. I'll call them Twitter people, the film Twitter people, and they were like, "Oh my God, I would never watch this if I hadn't have known." And they absolutely galvanized the two seasons, and I think the third season's coming. So things like that. There's also a brand new one that's just come out called Tore, Tor or Tore, and I thought this is a really powerful, beautiful piece of kind of drama comedy with this guy who wrote and starred in this, and he's an incredible talent. He's also possibly one of the most frustrating characters I've ever seen in TV, which is pretty impressive. So that's, you know, something that's quite accessible there. I think films, you know, film wise, you can never go wrong with Mads Mikkelsen, and everybody's so used to him in his English speaking roles, but he's, you know, equally just as good without. And I think The Promised Land's probably going to prove that again, you know, in the next few years, next year when that hopefully comes out over here. But Another Round, you know, mentioned is a great example of one film there. But if you prefer your action and things rather than a bit of kind of dry comedy or drama, Riders of Justice, which I think is on Sky Cinema, that is just a great, and I think it did really well because a lot of people kind of dug that kind of violent movie. A bit of a Christmas movie as well, actually. But other things, like there is the Joachim Trier trilogy, so I'm going to tell you, you need to go to movie and watch that. I'm not, you know, I'm not affiliated with them or anything, but they do pick out some great films, and the Joachim Trier trilogy is fantastic. You know, they all link up, and it's really interesting to see that on there. Visit the site. I mean, this is a legit plug, but if you want to find out, because there's horror. I mean, there's tons of horror out there. And I know there's a lot of big horror fans. You know, we all know about Speak No Evil, but there's a lot of other kind of great horrors out there as well. So yeah, there's a long-winded answer, I'm afraid, but it just to say there is a whole world of stuff that you can discover from the Nordic region, basically.
So that nicely leads us on to the film that we're going to be talking about today. Now, you suggested this film to me, Alex, and the film we're going to be talking about is Beautiful Beings. And I've never even heard of this film. And I was curious to see, you know, have you watched this film before, sort of, you know, suggesting we talk about it today? I'd never heard of it.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, this film, because I first saw it, I think it was maybe March or April last year. I was interviewing one of the guys from it, who's quite a famous actor called Olaf, so famous that I forget his name. Olafur Darri Olafsson, known as Darri. Now, he's really an interesting guy because he's done a lot of things in American series. He's appeared in True Detective season 1. He was in Nosferatu, which I haven't seen, but the Joe Hill adaptation, which apparently is very good. He got he was in the Meg, if you've watched the first one, and he's also done an enormous amount of Icelandic TV series and things, most notably Trapped, which was a huge thing, and that came onto BBC way back in I think 2016, I think it was. So I was speaking to him about one of his new series, and he brought this film up, and he said, "Seek it out. The young talent in this are incredible. It's for most of them, it's their debut film." And he was just like, "You need to watch this, Alex. Just like get on it." And he wasn't just plugging himself. I mean, he's in it very kind of for not a part of the film, but yeah. So that's how I first kind of discovered it, and of course I watched it, absolutely fell in love with it. Spoke with one of the stars, which I kind of come on to a bit later, but the film didn't get released in the UK for that whole entire year. And that was really frustrating. And what I found recently is that if a film's performing really well at a festival and doing the festival circuits, it will continue to do that. So this is something really interesting I found when I was speaking to an Icelandic producer, and they said, well, this is what happens. The film actually just keeps going. And that's why if you follow some directors, they're like in Athens or they're in Krakow and they're in all these places, and they're basically the film's just going to each one. And I think that kind of happened with this. It was Iceland's entry for the Oscars, and I think I thought it was a shame it didn't get a shot, but I think it was probably a bit too out there. But and then finally, Signature Entertainment got a hold of it and released it at the beginning of this year.
We should tell people who don't know about this film what it's about. We follow the character of Addy or Adi, I'm not sure. I'm going to get the names wrong completely on this, just to let you know. So feel free to correct me. You don't have to say it, Alex, at any point. So yeah, we follow Addy, a gifted boy raised by a clairvoyant mother, and he decides to adopt a bullied misfit into his gang of outsiders. And with that, they're left to their own devices, and the boys discover aggression, violence, loyalty, and love. So there's a lot going on here. We have a lot of various sort of scenarios and domestic situations going on in this film. I mean, I think I read this before going into it. I didn't watch any of the trailers, and that, I was okay. Like the first part, I was like, oh, it's kind of interesting, like maybe like a slice of life, that coming of age kind of film that I love, like a Richard Linklater, nice and warm. Oh no, this had some roller coaster of emotions. So I was like, oh, okay, this is fairly good film. And it takes a turn part way through. And I was like, okay, Alex has really stitched me up. But I was pleasantly surprised in sort of an overview. And I was just like, okay, there's a shift in genre and tone that I was not expecting from that. But yeah, it was wild. And I'm curious, like, does the director I can't pronounce his name.
Good, yeah, it's quite Goodmanson. I'm gonna go with that. We need a guy called Rob Watts who does a Quick from the Pods Icelandic podcast, which focus on Icelandic films and stuff, which is fantastic. His pronunciations are incredible, so I have to drop his name in there because if he listens or watches this, he will be going, Alex, you need to pronounce that better. So
let's just say the director of this film.
The director of this film, yeah, Goodman. Yeah, we'll go with yeah.
Have you seen any of the other directors' work prior to this film? Has he got this kind of storytelling genre and tone across his film so far? I've not seen any of his work prior to this, so I was just curious if you had.
Yeah, so this was the first film of his that I'd seen, and then I went to try and find his previous one, which is called Heartstone, which equally got quite a lot of accolade as well. Again, it was one of those situations where I could not find it for love. No, I couldn't find it anywhere. I think my brother found it on eBay, and it was like, hey, is this the one you're looking for? And I managed to get a DVD of it. And it was definitely worth kind of trawling around looking for it. And it is similar. It's really interesting with the kind of adolescence thing and teenagers and growing up and all of that kind of thing, which is part of the reason why I kind of, I love the fact that you kind of said that you thought about Richard Linklater and things like this, because in Iceland, again, you're thinking even Nordic noir or things like that, or maybe comedy. I mean, everybody thinks of Eurovision now, I guess, on Netflix, which had a lot of Icelandic stars in it. But no one really, and everybody thinks of Iceland as a beautiful country and destination and all of these places. I mean, this is what I sell every day to people going, yeah, go to Iceland, see this. And so peels back this layer, this beautiful layer that everybody sees of Iceland, and just delivers this full on like different world that you didn't think existed there, because you're so kind of blinkered by the beauty and the landscape and the travel and tourism side of it. But there's this whole world going on. So
Yeah, I definitely felt the same way, going there sort of over 10 years now. We just went to the tourist spots, the places, scenic retreats, and we went to Reykjavik, and that's, you just see the main kind of high street. We didn't really delve off, and yeah, it's interesting how it kind of flips that, perspective, and showing this kind of working class side. And yeah, like just, the houses, the clothing, the environments was just really interesting to see. It, yeah, like I say, it kind of subverts that typical, on a tourist poster or something, the colourful houses and everything in the city centre. So yeah, it's got that kind of grungy feeling that you might get, in kind of like a really sort of, yeah, British grungy film that I kind of like, that has something to it and depicts, different sort of, yeah, classes within society. So as soon as that sort of happened, the setup in the first act, I was like, okay, I'm interested now, because you've already subverted my expectations.
yeah.
I'm just curious to know if you could, from the film itself, if you could tell tonally that this was an Icelandic film. I've only seen Lamb, I think we mentioned before. Is this just approach that there's something part of it, part and parcel of Nordic cinema, or is it an Iceland? Can you feel Iceland in this film?
That's a really good question. I think not totally. I don't think, certainly on first watch, it feels, it almost feels like, very standalone. And I think that's probably something that drew me a lot to it. It's standalone in terms of something that's come from Iceland and from the Nordic region. Have I seen other films similar to it from the Nordic region? No. There are different kind of elements of it that, most recently there's Paradise is Burning, which was huge at London Film Festival. I say it's huge. It should be huge. It won an award. It's brilliant. Go and watch it when it comes over here. That's my plug for it, because it is fantastic. That's about three sisters growing up, and that's, it's a lighter kind of touch in it, and three debuts as well. So that's quite interesting. So I guess, yeah, and first initial watching, you're like, okay, this doesn't feel Icelandic. The only kind of elements really is just some of the scenery. There's a great scene where they go and trip out, and they're on the moss rocks and the kind of lava fields, and that, at that point, you're like, yeah, we're in Iceland. That's probably the only part where you can go, yeah, that's Iceland for us, apart from the language in it. But other than that, and the soundtrack, but there's not a lot else really that kind of yeah, makes you feel that it's an Icelandic film.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's some people's criticism. I think they say it's like sort of the Icelandic nature of it. When I was looking on Letterboxd, some people were like, oh, this could be anywhere or whatever. But I don't think it's really about I mean, it is about the environment, because these young lads are sort of forced into, the boredom. It's kind of got that. Is it set in like the noughties? I imagine that. It's kind of that. Is it like an old phone as well? So there's no technology. So they're forced into this sort of isolation and boredom, and that causes them to stay out all day, amongst other things as well. But I think that allows the characters, to be forced into these situations and explore certain things and their dynamic. So yeah, it was interesting having that sort of no tech, even though this was like a modern film.
Yeah, it was very kind of, yeah, I think the reliability on each of them in getting to see each other and things like that. I've never really thought that, and then that's an interesting point. Even watching again, I never really thought much about when it was when we were thinking at the time of when it was actually based. I think that's a good point. I mean, I know that some of the music in it is very modern, but yeah, I've never really thought too much about that actually. That's quite a good point. Kind
New
of,
perspectives, Alex, just peeling back the
yeah.
layers.
I'm gonna have to message one of them and go, hey, could you just let me know about this? Because
Just messaging one of my film
yeah,
friends.
yeah, they'll tell me. They'll be like, hey, you should know this, Alex. That's probably what they would say.
Yeah. I guess one of the main things I really sort of enjoyed about this film was the sort of, the tonal shifts of it sort of whiplashes you from one point to the next. Oh, you're sort of set into this sort of school bullying thing, and you're throwing, oh, let's throw in like these various situations that these boys are going through at home. You're feeling empathy, you're feeling joy, you're feeling disgust, like these boys are quite gross. Like you've
Yeah.
got all these like conflicted feelings within you, and they want to try and the director wants you to sort of empathize with these bullies by peeling back the layers of their sort of home life. We've sort of heard that time and time again, bullies are being bullied, sort of it comes from somewhere. It's this kind of cyclical nature. So sort of seeing that, I think Addy kind of breaks down like what everyone's role is within this sort of gang and their situations at home, and you kind of understand these characters a little bit more. I mean, they are pretty mean to the.
Well, they're shits. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's that's one of the things, and it was hard. I'll never forget first kind of watching it and thinking, God, I don't. I recently watched Piggy, which had some real serious bullying in that about one of the main characters' weight in it. It's a wild film. I definitely recommend it. I think it's Spanish. It's on, and I did kind of think of that, and I thought, I hate bullying. I think all of us have been maybe bullied at some point, and I really didn't like these characters at all. I thought they were complete assholes, and but you really grow to like them a lot. And I think that's in particular down to Addy's performance.
A lot of the main performances are from this young group of lads, these sort of four teenagers, and I think the performances are excellent. I do think the standouts are from Vigga, who plays Addy, and Victor, who plays Connie,
He's very
who's
good.
like the actual bully. And it's really insane because he feels like these are lived in characters.
It's one of the things I think in the film that I really enjoyed, because I thought it was just so well choreographed, is the violence in it. There's a particular scene that is at a gas station where there's just this punch up there, and the physicality of it, I mean, you literally feel it, and you genuinely believe in it. I'll never forget seeing that scene, and I was like, okay, we really got some, like, this is really interesting, because again, you don't think of this happening in Iceland. It happens everywhere, and then suddenly like, shit. And I think I learned the stunt guy from there, and his name I haven't written down, but he does a lot of stuff, and they all trained actually doing kind of USC and martial arts and things like that, even when they were all professionals, kind of professionally taught how to kind of move and things like that. Obviously they had stunt people in for some particular scenes, but Connie in particular, played by Victor Benoit, is incredibly good. And
it allows these young performers to sort of have center stage. The adults are literally their kind of idol, or they're not there at all, so it allows for these young actors to have that platform. And I love that. I love seeing up and coming talent, and I think I'm sure they're going to be popping up in some Nordic films you're going to be recommending in the future. Definitely, Alex.
They will be, yeah, certainly. I certainly know Birgit's in a new one called Cold, or Koldi at the moment, but I think it will be the Icelandic translation to English will be Cold, and hopefully might be hearing something about that soon, which would be good. And Victor, I know, is in a new series in Iceland next year, so we're going to keep an eye on that. But seriously talented kids. So, but they're still at school, they're still kind of finishing college and things like that as well. So it's just crazy.
This is my kind of takeaway from this film. The film deals with a lot of sort of themes. Obviously we have sort of toxic masculinity, we have themes of domestic violence. There's lots of things going on in this film, and it tries to juggle that, and I think it juggles it well, definitely. But to me, I don't know if I'm just taking this off, but was there kind of this within that masculinity, there's that kind of homoerotic undertone? That's what I took away, especially between this group. Maybe it's just because they're being very affectionate with each other. There's a moment where they're on top of the roof, and like Connie kind of leads into Addy, and he's sort of hugging him and sort of pat him on the head like affectionately. And I guess I don't know if it's kind of just breaking down that perception of toxic masculinity from these young guys, or is there something more there? Initially, I thought there was something more there. There's certain ways they look at each other and care for each other at the party and stuff. But then I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe the film kind of drops that idea, and maybe it's just my take. But I was curious to hear what you thought about that, Alex.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think there's a particular scene in the film that is absolutely distressing, which I think is slightly cut on the Amazon.
Okay.
Prime. I think it was a little bit more. I don't know whether there's a kind of slight kind of almost comical irony that they're trying to make there, saying that these are, toxic masculine kids.
Mm.
The toxic masculinity. Am I saying that right? um, and I think that they but but they've got this love. But I think they're so tight. I think this is the thing.
Mm.
I'm talking as a guy, plays rugby and we're all kind of hugging each other and all of this stuff, And I think there's that brotherhood kind of side of things.
Yeah.
But there is that slight teetering there. And I think that's a lot of it also may kind of point towards the lack of kind of fatherly love in the film. I mean, that's kind of definitely kind of set out quite early on. And I think that I think it's a closeness on there, but there's a border there, and it's never really clear. And I think I like that it's left to your own kind of interpretation there. But I know what you mean, definitely for sure. But I think I like how it's kind of left to let you kind of go,
Yeah.
what's happening there? Oh, they're just close, or is there
Yeah.
something more there with that?
It's interesting what you said about the sort of missing father figure, or whatever that may be in their circumstances. I think, yeah, I didn't really think about that. And sort of as you're saying it, it's almost that kind of like cub like situation, like a
Mm,
brother or something, that kind of dog piles and stuff, just having that kind of intimacy just through touch, just knowing
mm.
someone's there, rather than someone beating you up, is a different kind of. So maybe it just seems so stark in that sense. But yeah, I think, yeah, like I said, maybe he's just left that there, the director, hanging. And I
Yeah.
like that. You don't need to give me, this is what this means and this is what happened.
Yeah.
It's not treating you as an idiot. It kind of, I like that. It makes you think a lot more and have these discussions. You're like, was that, did I think about that? Yeah. And I
Mm.
think that's what makes great cinema, personally. So I was just curious, because obviously you've been talking, a lot of praise about this film, Alex. I was wondering, did you find any sort of negatives in this film? Was there anything you think actually on second watch, maybe that didn't work so well?
The only things that I could pull out was some interest, and there's a couple of these. One of these is just me being really stupid and trying to be funny, I guess. But in a particular scene that I have kind of lightly touched on a few moments ago,
Mm.
the song that is playing during this scene is one of my favorite Icelandic songs and tracks.
Oh no.
So I was a little bit pissed off with them about that,
Yeah.
because every now and again when I play that song in the car, I'm like, oh, don't think about that.
Oh,
Don't think about
yeah.
that. So I have a little bit of beef with them over that,
That's fair enough.
which I think is fair enough, right?
Yeah.
Um, I think that I think that one of the things that the film has to be careful with, it is a long film, it's just coming up close to 2 hours,
Mm.
is that it is the pace of it is pretty full on for the best part of at least
Mm.
almost 1.5 hours, and then it kind of hits the brakes very quickly, and we things just change, and even we go into some new kind of genres almost in a way as
Yes.
well,
Yeah.
which I found really interesting, and
Mm.
a nice kind of change of things there. And I think that's part of the introduction of Dari, actually, who arrives as the Barley's stepfather there. But I think that would be only kind of nitpicking in a way. What were your kind of negative vibes on it?
Yeah, I mean, generally, I really did like this film, and I'm thinking, like, I mean, anyone that's watching this sort of channel will know that I'm never really give 5 stars. Like, I'm very harsh in that sense. Give a lot of like, if I really, really love something, it's gonna be 4.5. Like, that's like sort of my sort of top level shop, really. And yeah, I was trying to think, why didn't I love this? Like, why is it not perfect? And I think maybe just the fact. this is again, it's been really sort of, nitpicky, but it sort of falls into the trap of, cliches at times in terms of,
Mm,
this is group of boys, we've got everything in the world that could happen that's going wrong. I've got domestic violence at home, parents aren't there, bullies, taking drugs for the first time. So it kind of falls, but then again, you could argue that is the coming of age film. If you put that in a comedy of, super bad, or okay, maybe not domestic violence, but everything else, it comes part and parcel with that kind of subgenre,
mm.
but it just has this darker undertone. um and yeah, maybe that's sort of the pacing. I really enjoyed the first half. I was kind of enthralled in this, and then when you add in these other genres, which I did like, but I don't know, I think there's some things that maybe weren't tied up neatly. Obviously we swap kind of perspective with the protagonists. What's his name? Bali.
Bali, yeah.
Yeah, originally it's Bali, and then we sort of swapped to Addy, and it's interesting, that switch. And adding in sort of, some supernatural elements and other genres. Yeah, I don't know. I think there's some things I just would have liked to have had a little bit more sort of neatened up, and packaged, I think. But generally, I'm loving this film. I've been thinking about it since I've watched it
That's
constantly.
cool. Okay, that's
Um,
good.
that bodes well, I think, in
Yeah,
terms
I
of
think so. I think,
yeah.
yeah, I think sometimes some things sit with you, and um I always find, like, when you go and seek the soundtrack,
Mm,
and I don't even know if there might, I think there are some out there, but I find that with a film, if you loved it so much and then you listen to the soundtrack, and then
yes.
you listen to that
Yeah.
soundtrack, and then you start thinking about the film and stuff like that.
Putting
There's
yourself
probably
in that
not one of
moment.
the tracks on there which make you try not to think of one
Yeah.
terrible scene
Yeah.
in that, but
Yeah.
but I think that bodes well for, yeah, I think that's a good sign, a good
Yeah.
sign.
I was just wondering if you had any sort of closing remarks on this film, whether it's your adoration for this film, or, anything else that we've not talked about.
Yeah, I just I'm so glad that you liked it. I think
Mm.
I've built a bit of a reputation. I remember asking the brilliant Stu Talks to watch
Yeah.
Speak No Evil, and he yeah, he said thank you but fuck you, Alex. So that was a good one, but I made up for it now because
Yeah.
I
I'm not
recommended
telling you to
something
fuck
else.
off yet.
Yeah, but I think, I want a film to have a bit of an effect. I
Mm,
want to recommend something to you that you're going to go, yeah, okay, that's woken me up and it's made me think, and
yes.
maybe,
Definitely.
what I hope with this film is that, the people do go and watch it and go, okay, I'm now interested
Mm,
in finding what other Nordic films there are out there, because there's a lot of dark stuff. If you like that, it's not all about murder mysteries, as I
mm,
say. There is some pretty full-on stuff out there, which is it's great fun to watch. In a weird way. Does that sound strange? Um,
that's fine. I think
but
everyone's watched some dark stuff, so it's
yeah,
fine.
there's always something. Yeah, I'm still recovering from When Evil Lurks, so that was
Mm,
yeah. But I think yeah, I think I'm just happy that this film's actually a lot more accessible. With it being on Amazon Prime and things like that. And I hope that more people get to see it, even if 5 or 10 people get to see it because they've watched this or they've read that, then that's fantastic, because I know personally how much that means to this to the actors and the director. It's a big, really big deal for them, and I think that's one of the most interesting things with Nordic Watchlist, I think, is the kind of relationship building actually with the people behind the films, and how much it means to them. I don't think audiences know or realize how special it is when someone
mm,
sings praise about their film, if they're from the UK, US. It's huge. It's huge for them. So I
yeah.
hope on that, more people get to see this film.
I mean, just today alone, I've been talking to people at work. I'm like, oh, there's this amazing Icelandic film. It's not your typical noir thriller. So I've already recommended to two people at work. And like, yep, I'm going to watch that. So, and making it, accessible through Amazon Prime, is an amazing way to
Makes all the
get people to
difference.
see
Yeah.
it. Honestly, we've sort of said how much we love this film. So I guess if you could give me a rating out of 5, Alex, what would you give Beautiful Beings?
I'm a sucker. I stick with a 5-star rating for this. I genuinely, I think based on, I'm very big on the kind of performances on there. I think it really, really did strike me. uh, I probably, some people might shoot me for this, but I've seen other people say this, but I genuinely Addy's character, but Birgit reminded me of kind of young River Phoenix in Stand By Me. He had that same
Oh,
energy and
yeah.
vibe there. I didn't think he even knew that film existed, so he definitely, so young, but there was that kind of feel, and I was just totally I really rooted for that character. I
Mm,
found him so interesting because he's a sweet-faced kid who's, quite shit, quite violent shit at times.
yeah.
But there's a heart somewhere, and then there's everything else that kind of comes into it later as well, which is really interesting. So I think, based on that, I think the performances, the soundtrack, just also, I mean, 1 star alone just for some of the violence and the choreography of the violence. So I
Mm.
don't sound too much like a psycho, but the
Massive
choreography of violence.
sadist.
There is, yeah,
I guess in terms of my rating, I gave it 4 out of 5. Like I said before, I don't really give 5 out of 5s except for
yeah,
Barbie this
that's
year
a good
because I really
that's a good
enjoyed
one.
that.
That's a good start.
But yeah, I think a 4 is a really good score for me. 8 out of 10, whatever you want to rank it on. But yeah, really, really enjoyed this one. I think it's going to be hard in terms of rewatchability. I'll give it a bit of time. You can't just pop it on. Oh yeah, just my comfort watches. Beautiful beings. No one's really saying unless you might say that, Alex, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes there's comfort watch films, isn't
Oh,
there?
horror
Which
films, definitely,
like
I
I
think.
think, yeah, I think a lot with horror films, and I think that's the difference, I guess, with this is that it's like, oh, well, this is, it's a bit too realistic,
Yeah.
from that
Yes. Yeah.
perspective. But yeah, I looked, I was excited to watch it again, and
Mm.
I think I'd kind of I had forgotten parts of it. And I do remember watching the kind of opening going, oh my God, what is Sarah going to say to me? Like, I'm going to get another berated, like
Oh
on
gosh.
YouTube, like I was by Stu. But I just think the whole thing is it tests. I think the film tests you at the beginning, and you
Mm.
can check out
Yeah.
if that's not for you, then that's fine. But I think the film it kind of tests you, and that's the beauty of it. And I think if you roll with it, um, then you get sucked into that film.
Mm.
And
Definitely.
I think watching it again was really interesting. There are little aspects, and you can start to look at how certain films were, elements of it were shot, and those
Mm.
kind of side of it, and also the foreboding, which is really interesting actually, given the kind of turn in the film. Actually,
Mm.
when you go back and watch it, you start going, oh, okay, so
There was there
that's
was
one
a
of the fun
moment where I
things.
sort of realised I was sort of like, oh, just watching this thing. I was like, hang on, this is lingering too long. And I looked a little bit closer and I was like, oh, there's
Yeah,
something there. And I was like, okay.
yeah, it's
Adding
just
another
yeah.
element to this film. I was like, oh god, okay.
Yeah, it's almost going bad book or something like that. But
Yeah,
yeah, it
yeah.
was some interesting stuff. So, but yes, I think definitely rewatch is good, but
Mhm.
give yourself a bit of time and make sure you've got something fluffy to watch afterwards.
Well, thank you very much for joining me today, Alex from the Nordic Watchlist. Please let the people know where they can find you and learn all about these amazing films and TV shows.
Yeah, sure. And thank you so much for having me, Sarah. I've really enjoyed talking about beautiful beings and Nordic Watchlist. Head on over to the website's nordicwatchlist.com, nice and easy, and as is my Instagram, Nordic Watchlist at Nordic Watchlist, and same for Twitter as well. I'm pretty sure, but you'll find that a lot of my posts on Instagram will be kind of all the interviews and different articles that we've got going out, and equally with the website and things like that. And please do always message me if there's stuff that you want guidance on or where to find it and things like that. I had someone message me the other day and asked me where Cold Prey 3 was, and I was like, I really want to help you here, but that's an old film, and I
Yeah.
I tried, but but it was nice. It was nice, I am invested. I will answer. I always love chatting, anyway, and so yeah, so do message and get in touch, and we're happy to try and help at least.
Yeah, we'll definitely I'll link everything down below so you can all check out where to find your latest, Nordic releases and some old ones. I'm sure you can find it on Nordic Watchlist.